From Network Nova Live, it's June 14th, 2024, and it is Flag Day. You are on the Friday Power Lunch. I'm Catherine White, your host, bringing you all the guests, the issues, the action. We are fueling the grassroots across Virginia and coast to coast, and we're bringing the muscle. Yes, we are, to get things done. And we also like to make politics fun. That's what we like to do. And today we're defending public education for the children. And we have some special guests today that are going to bring it. Jennifer Berkshire is here, journalist and co-author of The Education Wars, A Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual, and Liz Mikitarian, founder of Stop Moms for Liberty. And you know, Liz, we don't like to say Moms for Liberty. We say Moms for Illiberty. But Liz is here, and I am so grateful she's in the room today because education seems to be under attack still, and we're going to make sure we stop that. Cheryl Binkley is one of our favorites because she is a local person fighting for the schools in Fairfax, Virginia, and across Virginia. She's co-founder of For Public Education. Welcome, Cheryl, because no one's coming to save us. It is up to us.
Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch, badass women getting things done.
So I'm going to pass the show on today to our very wonderful co-hosts. We have Fennell Norton here today, and across the Tidewater, a lot of Tidewaters happening today. We also have Carrie Short. So it's going to be our host from Tidewater going to be carrying it on. So thank you, ladies, for bringing it today. I'll be excited. Yeah.
Thanks for trusting the coastal communities to the Friday Power Lunch. We're so honored.
Nervous. You know, we get probably some flooding over there that maybe it's going to stop you, but I don't think so. I'm going to be excited to let you guys run the show and for the children. So
it's all for the children.
All for those.
So Carrie, before we get started for the children, there's some things for the children. You had some things you wanted to talk about this morning. You were talking about his Flag Day and taking back the flag. What do you think about that?
Well, definitely want to weigh in on that after we talk about our video, but I really want to introduce this idea that education, when we talk about education, what we're really talking about is children. It's for the children. And we often are making sacrifices for the children every day. We're organizing for the children every day. It's really for the children. And I think that got to drill down and find out, what are you willing to do for the children? And no one says it better than this inspirational figure. So we've got this video queued up.
What are some of your priorities, in your view, that you share with the Biden administration, or maybe even that maybe differ, that he might want to know about?
Well, when people ask me what are the three most important issues facing the Congress, for my whole time in Congress, I've always said the same thing. Our children, our children, our children. Their health, their education, the economic security of their families, a healthy, safe environment in which they can thrive, a world at peace in which they can reach their fulfillment. It's always for me about the children. So I've said, and people laugh when I say it, but I always say to candidates, and especially women candidates, when you come into this arena, you're in the arena, you're going to have to be able to take a punch. You have to be able to throw a punch for the children. For the children.
So I just want to know, sometimes, we talk about what are you willing to do for the children? Of course, when I saw that video, I couldn't help but think of spring break. This year, a bunch of us moms had to go to the Dominican Republic with a bunch of kids and sitting on the poolside. We were talking about, we're doing this for the children. I mean, we're sitting there having our Mai Tais.
Oh, yeah. For the children. So Carrie, what else are you doing for the children?
Well, for the children, we're educating people about the severity of some of the extremism going on in the public schools. And of course, as you know, it is front and center in Virginia Beach Public Schools. There's some stuff going on there with some extremists. They've already got a book banning committee. So it's really happening. And I'm so glad we have this opportunity this week, on Monday night, COVA Coalition hosted a forum of local school board candidates. It's the first time that we've had a grassroots hosted forum, and it really gave people an opportunity to hear from the school board candidates, which is so important because I think a lot of people with the party affiliation, we use that party affiliation as sort of a shorthand of what someone stands for. That's not really safe anymore. And it certainly doesn't happen in a school board race where no one has party alignment. So it is really important to talk to as many school board candidates as possible because it's really happening down at that level. So, but anyway, so that's kind of what we've been doing, to shed light on the school board. And, you do have to get in the weeds with it. That's the reality of it.
Yeah. I think that Nancy Pelosi makes it very clear in terms of what it's about. It is for their health and well-being. It is for their economic security. It is all the things that we should never take for granted. But I think what I love about what she says is that you got to be able to take a punch and you got to be able to throw a punch. And we do it all for the children.
For the children. We're not, we talk about this at the forum actually on Monday night, we're lovers, not fighters. It tends to be the Democrats are the ones. We're not the ones throwing the chairs at the school board meeting, just quite frankly. So, I'm going to have to learn to embrace Nancy's throwing punches. I'm going to have to figure out how that reconciles with my peace-loving person, but I'm willing to do it for the children.
Yeah. And I think it'll probably take a little, maybe a Mai Tai or two. But I do think that that's what I love about today's discussion is that it will give us an opportunity to really learn how to fight back. Because I love the notion of being defiant. I love the idea of knowing your audience. And when you know your audience, you know when you might have to take a punch, but I think you'll also know when you have to give a punch. And when it comes to the Moms of Liberty, I'm thinking that we're going to have to give a punch for the children.
For the children. We have to stand our ground. We have to stand our ground on that. And also, so just kind of segueing into something else that's been on my mind today, because I'm really looking forward to that conversation. But something else that's been on my mind is today is Flag Day, right? So I went to the gym. I wore my most patriotic workout gear today. But I want to talk about the flag. And I'm not talking about Martha Ann Alito's flag, right? Or Eugene Vidman's flag, all right? I want to talk about Old Glory, right? Because the Republicans just love to wrap themselves in that flag. And I think, I wear this when I work the polls. And everyone, of course, walks right up to me thinking I'm the Republican because I'm the one with the flag. Well, guess what? Democrats love the flag too. And we love our country. And I think we need to reclaim our flag. And we need to reclaim that love of country message. And isn't that why we're supporting public education? It's our mandate. And it is our mandate to educate all children. And we may have strayed from that in our past. In our American tradition, yes, we have strayed from that. But it's our mandate as Americans. So people look at us and say, they want to fix it, so they must not love it. We love our country. That's why we want to fix it. The Republicans want to blow it up. All the chaos in Congress, they're trying to blow stuff up. And we've seen the day one agenda for the second Trump administration that we're not going to let happen. But that day one agenda is to completely blow up the Department of Education, lots of administrative bureaucrats who we rely on to form good policy and advise the administration on things. They're all going to be gone because they just want to blow it up. So I think it's important for us as Democrats today, us as progressives today, to go ahead and embrace that flag and embrace our country and demonstrate your love of country today and every day. Because we love it. That's why we want to fix it. We're not going to blow it up. So, and public schools is a big part of that. They're taking it's death by 1,000 cuts with gagging, putting gag orders on our teachers. They can't talk about things. They can't call a child by their selected name or their selected gender identity. And these vouchers that are going to fund parochial and private schools. And then here in Virginia, not allowing localities to tax themselves to fix the crumbling schools that Governor Youngkin campaigned in front of. So yes, we're the defenders, not just of democracy, I think, I'm a big fan of Pod Save America. And the other day they were saying, we talk about defend democracy, defend democracy, defend democracy. And that doesn't always resonate with people, but fixing democracy it might actually, sound like that's more of what we're trying to do. So I don't know. I think that's just on my mind today, is that we love our country too. And we love our flag.
Yeah, I do. And I think, so I'm going to bring the summit into this because we are going to do a fashion show around democracy in the summit. Democracy looks good on you. And so I think that for democracy looks good on you, that we ought to be wrapping ourselves in the flag too, unlike, somebody who does it on stage looking like an idiot. And so I think that this is our opportunity, whether it's at the polls, which I'm going to take that idea because I think it's fantastic, to start to demonstrate that this is who we are and that they don't have a right to take that away. And I do think in terms of education, why it's so important. And I think myself that a nice punchback to banning books is, how stupid do you want to make your kids? And so when they don't have the ability to have a full-throated education, looking at all sides of things, we make them little dum-dums. So we don't want the moms of liberty. If they want to do that for their kids, have that. But other parents have the right to have their kids have a full education. And I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is bringing all parents into the fold. We have this assumption that everyone knows what's going on, and they just don't. And so that makes me really, really excited, because that means we have to look at all kinds of ways, not just the traditional ways of letting people know what's happening, but we have to look at some new innovative ways of how we bring people in and let them know what's going on, because the majority of people do not believe what these women believe in. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to that. So Carrie, I think that we can get to our first segment now. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm really, really excited that we're going to talk to Jennifer Berkshire. She's a journalist and co-author of The Education Wars, A Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual. And so, Jennifer, I think this is the perfect opportunity for you to, first of all, just tell us, why is all this happening? All of a sudden, is all this happening?
Well, I'm so excited to be here, and I can't tell you just how affirming it is to see all this energy and to find myself in a setting where people really get it, that public education is an issue we need to organize around, and that, we outnumber the extremists. And if your goal is to rally people to win elections, you have to remember that, right? It can be so hard to keep that in mind, because the Moms for Liberty folks are really well funded. Their voices are really loud, and it's easy to get beaten down and to think, all we have is our grassroots energy. We'll never be able to overcome the power of Betsy DeVos's pocketbook. But if we look around the country at the actual results of elections, we see that just isn't true. And so my book is called The Education Wars. It'll be out for real in a few weeks. And my co-author and I, we wanted to produce something that would explain to people what is all the fighting about when it comes to our schools and what can we do about it.
So Jennifer, I love that. I did try to order the book already, so I already put in my pre-order. So I'll have mine July 4th when it comes out. So I'm very excited about that. One of the things that I know is that the half of the solution to solving a problem is understanding the why. And so talk to us about, why is this happening?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the short answer. My co-author is the academic, so his answers are always very long. Mine are not. So one reason that we're fighting so intensely right now is really that we're fighting about everything, right? That trust in our institutions is way down. And it's not just that we disagree with each other, it's that we actively dislike each other. And schools are places where we come together across lines of difference. So all of a sudden, that's gotten a lot harder to do. But another big part of the problem is that we don't agree anymore on what schools are for. And I think Carrie's imploring us to think about patriotism is a great example, because we settled on this very narrow definition of what schools are for. They're to prepare kids for the workforce. And that basically we're, like we view education as a kind of individual consumer good. That makes it a lot harder to defend. And if we think of it as having this broader social purpose to teach kids about the country that they live in, warts and all, suddenly it has a bigger purpose, and that makes it easier to defend.
So because it's a greater purpose, when do we get so off track about not wanting to understand the greater purpose and have our kids understand that?
Yeah, so a big part of the reason, like if we got into our time machines and went way back to the earliest days of public education, the purpose of it would be really clear, that if we were going to have a self-governing democracy, people needed to learn how to be democratic citizens. But then over time, that really falls away, and the mission becomes preparing kids for the workforce. And then over the past few decades, that really gets narrower and narrower. And so I bet a lot of people, if we quiz people who are on this call, a lot of them might think that the purpose of education is to prepare kids to get into an elite college, right? And so we can see how that makes us more vulnerable, because suddenly the definition of a school and whether it's succeeding is about whether it's delivering for your kid. But what about the other kids? And so suddenly we're in this place where we don't have a big we that we're rallying around. We define the purpose of school and whether it delivers in terms of what it's producing for our individual kid. And so then when Moms for Liberty pops up and says, I'm only concerned about my kid, and this very narrow definition of what a school should do, I want the school to pass on my religious values, we're left kind of casting around like, well, wait a second, we're not sure what we think schools should do anymore.
Wow. And so now that we sort of know the why of this, because we've taken away this broader perspective, we've got banned books, we have all of these things happening that we just would have never imagined. How do we think about doing something about it? Like, what are some of the first steps that we ought to be thinking about?
We do exactly the sorts of things that Carrie was describing, where we build these grassroots coalitions. And I think what's really important for people to remember is that when groups like Moms for Liberty first popped up on the scene, and they really seemed so powerful. But folks are really surprised when I tell them that they lose about 2/3 of their elections. And the reason is that they're presenting a vision that's small and angry and mean, as we're going to be hearing about a little bit later in the show. And so if you're able to put together a coalition of groups that's bigger than that, that's better than that has a broader vision of why we have public education and a vision that's for the kids, you're going to beat those candidates. And so we see that happening again and again, really all over the country.
So can we talk about some of the things that when we think about money, right? So because I have this idea that a person on the ground is more powerful than any dollar. And so how do you guys think about how to put those kind of coalitions together so that they are successful?
Yeah, so that's absolutely true. Like, look at the money that's sloshing around now at the state level. Anywhere you see a huge voucher program being rammed through, it's awash in funding from deep-pocketed donors like Betsy DeVos and Jeff Yass, the richest man in Pennsylvania. And so that means that we have to use all of the grassroots energy that we have. And when you look at communities that are doing this really effectively, it's because they're stitching together a coalition that includes groups that haven't been that involved in school-related issues historically. And I'm thinking about, coalitions that include gay and lesbian groups, citizens groups, pro-democracy groups, your League of Women Voters. When you visit a state, and you're going to hear about this from Jess Piper from Missouri, my favorite dirt road Democrat, when she comes to your event in a couple of weeks. people on the ground really understand the push for school privatization as part of a larger effort to weaken democracy. That makes it really scary, but it also means that it enables us to build a model of resistance that's not limited to people who have kids in the public schools. That's what really gives me hope and heart right now. I feel like everywhere I go, I feel people waking up.
That's awesome. I have one final question for you, and it really sort of centers around innovation in terms of how we think about different kinds of things
Mhm.
that we have not ordinarily talked about when it comes to fighting some of these challenges that we have. Can you just share, it may be in the book, but an innovative idea that you guys have had and presented that's successful?
Yeah, so there's a little passage in the book that we're getting a lot of questions about, and it says that defending public schools is not the same as defending the status quo. Now, what do we mean by that? To me, the most exciting organizing that's happening right now is bringing together the kinds of affluent suburban parents who are really happy with the quality of their schools, right? Like the traditional kind of save our schools mom.
Mhm.
um, they're bringing together those parents with parents for whom the schools have not historically delivered. And I'm thinking of parents of kids with special needs. I'm thinking of rural parents and African American parents. And that means that we're going to have to acknowledge that there are lots of things about the way that we're doing public education that are not working. And in the past, like if I heard somebody say that, I would have gotten my back up a little bit, right? I would have gotten really defensive. But I actually think that one of the big opportunities that's presented by the direness of the threat is to say, here are the principles that are really important, but that, maybe we don't have to be so wedded to a particular model of doing public school. And that opens up the possibility for broader coalitions. And I think for enabling us to really make the kind of bold case for having public schools that's been lost from our conversation.
So let me just go back and dig into that question a little bit more. So because you were talking about these broader coalitions and people's, sort of the hair standing up on their backs a little bit. So let's talk about that. So some of the ones I think you mentioned the League of Women Voters and some of the other groups. What has been sort of the ones that people have sort of been challenged with? Because I think I hear what you're saying is saying that you might have to give a little to get a lot to get a lot. So
Yeah, that's right. So I would point you to a couple of models. There's a group in North Carolina called Public School Strong that is doing just a phenomenal job of organizing parents across lines of difference around school board races and just creating a much bigger definition of what it means to be involved in schools. And you kind of mentioned this, that, like you can't just count on the fact that parents know how to be involved or feel comfortable being involved. We have to change the way we do things with respect to that. And then I would also point folks to places where rural Republicans have been fighting really hard against school vouchers. And that's another place where you see bipartisan coalitions forming. That feels kind of hard to imagine right now because we're so divided politically. But when I hear about people coming together across partisan lines and waking up and realizing, hey, you know what? Politicians and deep pocketed donors are fanning the flames of the culture war because they want school vouchers. Like, to me, that feels like a very promising way to organize.
So we're going to continue chatting for just a few minutes. This is Jennifer Berkshire, journalist and co-author, The Education Wars, A Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual. So let's talk a little bit about the defense part of this. So when you think about the defense manual in terms of what you guys have written about how we defend ourselves and our school against this, can we just sort of just drill down on that just a little?
So I would say that rule number one, we have been way too willing to outsource the defense of public education to teachers, and they can't do it alone. It's not realistic, but it's also made the defense of public education look like a project of the teachers unions. And that just defines it too narrowly. And I think what we're starting to see now is that people are waking up, that's not an effective way to do it. So that's item number one. Item number two is to really, look for public school allies in unlikely places. And there I would point you to a group like Pastors for Texas Children. And they are very concerned about this now huge flow of money, of public money to fund religious institutions, especially money that's going to pay for Catholic education, because they don't want kids being taught that the Pope is infallible. And so from the outside, we might look at something like that and think like, oh, all the religious groups agree. But the answer is that they don't. That you might find religious groups that are really concerned about the erosion and undermining of the separation of church and state. So don't depend just on teachers, and look for allies, however unlikely they might seem from the outside.
Wow, that is really fantastic. I'm gonna before Carrie comes on, I just want to know what is the one thing that as you were putting this book together that you found really surprising and shocking that we all should sort of be aware of or know about or even be thinking about?
Not just how old our battles over public education are, but how you could actually find the exact same groups that are so busy fanning the flames today, fanning the flames 30, 40, and 50 years ago. And I'm thinking about something like the Heritage Foundation, which,
Mhm.
as you all know, is the driving force behind Project 2025. Well, back in the 70s, when people were fighting over the schools in West Virginia, Heritage rushed to the scene because they thought they had settled on a way to drive parents out of the public schools. And so they would go down there and they would, try to spread the word that public schools were indoctrinating kids into cannibalism and bestiality. It didn't work then. It won't work now. And I found that both eye-opening, but also kind of encouraging in a weird way.
Yeah, this is so one of the things that I know Carrie just joined. I would just follow to say, Shenandoah County here in Virginia, where they renamed the schools back to the Confederate Generals, which was really shameful and more shameful. I don't know if you have been keeping up with that or if you have any thoughts on that.
I have. And my first thought when I hear about a story like that is what an organizing opportunity, because I find it, hard to believe that like that's really a cause that's going to rally a big coalition of folks around it. That to me, the crusade against what they call wokeness
Mhm.
it feels much more tired than it did when Glenn Youngkin ran for governor.
Yeah. And so thank you for that. And just to everybody who's been really enjoying this conversation, you're going to be doing an after summit program in the fall for public education as part of the summit. So you're going to be post programming. It's going to be very exciting. And I know that everyone on this call today will be delighted to be able to go even further in depth on the book, The Education Wars. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me.
Carrie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I know that's so inspiring. I'm going to go pre-order too. Let's get that thing up. Let's get that thing up. So, yes, yeah, there it is. So, we are now being joined by Liz Mikitarian, and she is a retired teacher, a retired kindergarten teacher, who founded Stop Moms for Liberty. I think Jennifer did a pretty good job of talking about some of the antics that they've been trying in our local school systems. We've certainly seen it. But you started that Stops Mom for Liberty in response to some organizing they were doing in your community. So we'd like to hear about just how you got started and tell us a little bit about it.
Sure, sure. So thank you for including me today. This is a wonderful group. I am in Brevard County, Florida, which is where Moms for Liberty started. So we were watching their development, and honestly, we thought it was a joke. We didn't take them seriously. But the third founder, Bridget Ziegler out of Sarasota, Florida, her husband was the chair of the Republican Party for the state of Florida. And he's actually quoted publicly as saying, oh, good, Moms for Liberty can be the boots on the ground and move all the people into becoming Republicans. They were looking at getting that suburban mom vote. So almost from the beginning, it was definitely not a grassroots movement. And so because it was in my own county, I went on to their, I guess it was their Facebook group at the time, and tried to be a voice of reason and tried to say, you know, what you're being told is not actually what's happening in our schools. And let's talk about this. I've spent my life in schools. I know what's going on there. And instead of having that conversation and nipping this in the bud kind of at the beginning, they, through, you know, their handlers or whatever, attacked me, claimed that my career had been a sham, that I must have supported pedophilia, and that I had indoctrinated and groomed children for all of those years that I was teaching kindergarten. And so, of course, I got a little upset at the beginning. But then I started thinking, you know, I'm retired. So, yeah, it hurts my feelings, but it doesn't impact my livelihood, obviously. And I started reaching out across the state of Florida to find out, hey, am I just this sole person that's being attacked? And unfortunately, I found that that was kind of their mode of operation, is to go on the attack against teachers. Now we've seen against media specialists. And so the attacks were coming more than what were acceptable, obviously. And so we branched out across the state of Florida, and then South Carolina reached out and said, you know, we've got some issues going on here. Have you thought about going into other states and doing this organizing? And I said, well, no, I'm retired. I thought I was going to be reading the books on my counter that were piled up. But I said, hey, if you're having an issue, let's get going. Let's pull some people together. So our whole mission is one of communication, because what I saw happening across the country is that there were boots on the ground. I think that was referenced in the first piece that you ran here, that there were people working. There were folks that were standing up and saying, you know what, I support public schools. What's going on here? But the piece I didn't see was that there wasn't much collaboration with those various groups. I always use the example, I discovered that the NAACP had stepped up and they were supporting a particular district, and yet the same issue was happening in the neighboring district, but they hadn't reached out to the NAACP for help. And so that coordination of support across the country is the sole mission of Stop Moms for Liberty. We are a non-entity, really. We are strictly a movement. And I did that strategically. So we don't take any money in. We don't have, you know, officers or a board of directors or anything of that nature. We have those boots on the ground that are willing to do this on a volunteer basis to make sure that our country is more informed about what's going on, because
So
it's really bad
I
stuff.
wanted to ask you specifically, you had mentioned that personal attack. So how many local school teachers are suffering personal attacks in your opinion? And what are you doing to help them about that?
Sure. Well, I'm actually in process of developing what hopefully will be called the Teacher or Protect Teachers project, because the attacks are not only limited to the vitriol on Facebook, but I know of at least two educators where they're going after their jobs. And so I can't disclose all of the details right now because it's in development, but those are the folks that often feel like they're standing alone, because let's face it, unions themselves are under attack right now. And so they are trying to even, you know, stay in business, so to speak. And so it's really difficult to lend the support to teachers, and they do feel alone. The number I can't say in particular, but this directly correlates with the number of people in this teacher shortage that we are experiencing. Across the state of Florida, at one point, we had 10,000 teacher vacancies. Currently in my district, I think it's around the 200 mark or something. And people may say, yeah, well, fine, that's, lost teachers, big deal. But they have to translate those numbers always, multiply that by 30. And that's when you get the number of children that are impacted by every time there isn't a qualified and wonderful teacher in front of them. So
Right.
as you're
Right.
saying about the children, just because it feels like an attack on teachers, it isn't. It's also an attack on our children and their opportunity to get a good education.
Right. So, with those practical steps in supporting teachers, what are the practical steps that you're encouraging people to take to stop Moms for Liberty?
Sure, absolutely. I love the approach of just always being the voice of reason. And as Jennifer said, we're not the folks that are throwing the chairs around school board meetings. We are just stating fact. And so we have efforts to have our members across the country, some of them, this is totally new to them and it's been difficult, but they are going to their school board meetings and they are speaking with reason and rational thinking, and people are listening. And so, as was referenced, it's not working. And I really like to point people to the statistics. In November of 22, Moms for Liberty was on a roll, and they sat close to 300 school board meetings, members across the nation. Fast forward to that spring of 24, no, excuse me, spring of 23, and they had a lot less success. I think they might have had maybe about 70 positions that were taken over by a Moms for Liberty member. And then you go to the fall, even less. And so the trajectory has done this on their ability to seat and take over school board level
Yeah.
leadership at the
It
district.
seemed like it really did seem like Moms for Liberty was on the ropes there for a little bit. But I've also heard that they've just reorganized. So what kinds of things should we look for in our own communities that kind of are red flags that tell you that they might be Moms for Liberty, even if they're not actually using that name?
Sure. There are specific things to look at. Things like candidates that say that they are for parental rights. Any candidate worth their salt understands that parents have always had these rights that they're talking about, always been able to look at curriculum, always been able to object to any books or materials, but they have convinced their members in Moms for Liberty that, oh, those rights are not, in place for you. It's not true. You can be on school improvement committees. You can be on PTAs, PTOs across the country. If a parent chooses to be involved, there are lots of ways for that to happen. And so it's a false premise, this whole parent rights movement, because they already have all the rights that they're being convinced that they don't have. So there's
Right.
that piece. We find candidates who talk a lot about going back to the basics, and schools need to talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, as a person that has spent my life educating children, it is an impossibility to only focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic until you meet the needs of the whole child. If that child is hungry, if that child is in trauma, they are not going to listen to anything we dish out. And so for them to try and separate the social emotional impact of what happens in a classroom is frankly a sin. And
So
it's
kind of the back to basics language is just reflecting make America great again,
correct.
right? Like back
Correct.
to basics, like who decided those basics?
Right, right. And,
Right. Agreed.
I mean, we've had candidates that don't say that they're Moms for Liberty, but if they're talking about indoctrination and they need to get indoctrination out of the schools, if they need to get pornography out of the schools, this is all their manual, right? They actually have training for school board members, and they are led by the Leadership Institute, and that is directly funded by Heritage Foundation. And so we need to look more closely. Now, the good part of this story is that they were floundering each time there was a news cycle, right? There was something salacious that came out. There was the affair in Sarasota where, the most vocal person that's against LGBTQ plus community was in a same-sex relationship with another woman. And so that hypocrisy is built in there. We don't care about her relationship, but the fact that she was fighting against what she was actually participating against shows the hypocrisy of this whole movement. So yeah, I mean, we have to fight back. Absolutely.
Okay. So I was also wondering, how are you mentioned the school board candidates and the races. So I know you mentioned something about a seal of approval. So
Yeah.
I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that, because we may have some candidates. In fact, I know we have some candidates on today's show because I saw them making comments in the chat.
Sure. Yeah, there's some comments in the chat about it. Together with Democracy and Education, and I think Karen is on the call today, we have partnered with them, and we've partnered with the School Board Integrity Project, which is in the Midwest. And again, I like to coordinate and put together the pieces of the puzzle. That's what our mission is. And so instead of going down the road of, oh, well, let's find a way to vet candidates and let's provide resources for them, those pieces are already out there. And so the Integrity Project does the vetting of the candidates. And then they and Democracy and Education and Stop Moms for Liberty then have some resources that these candidates can get. So we came up with a seal of approval. It's not a quote unquote endorsement. I was advised legally that I might not want to use that word, so we haven't. And it lends itself to my background that, I will give the A+ seal of approval when a candidate shows that they are pro public education, because that's what we're really talking about. And I loved so much of what Jennifer said, and I wrote down some notes actually. And our goal is to improve public education, not to destroy public education. And although they may say, oh, they just want the schools to be better, that is not the mission. And even their own members don't really understand, perhaps, although they really should by this time, because we have gone public. This isn't about improving public schools. This is about making sure that we are able to move public funds into private settings for the reasons that Jennifer stated.
Yes,
And
right.
this has
Yes.
been unfolding for decades. I lived in Michigan when Betsy DeVos was there, working her magic that turned out to be destruction. And unfortunately, the public schools are the lowest hanging fruit in the Project 2025 plan, which is very obvious. It's all in writing. Don't believe me. Believe what they've written as their plan.
Right.
Go
Right.
and I won't say anybody needs to read the 900 pages, but read the coverage on Project 2025.
Yeah.
It is
And then the challenge will be for us to communicate that to folks in a reasonable manner where it doesn't sound so hyperbolic that they're once again are thinking there's no way she could possibly do that. Well, yeah, actually she did. So yes. Well, thanks for all of your work. I look forward to connecting with you. I know a lot of folks we have a lot of grassroots leaders on this call, and I know they're going to be reaching out to you for pointers on how to defend democracy and our public schools. So thank you so much.
We are seeing a whole lot of success. So I loved your intro, love the video and the song, and we are seeing success. And yes, we're not funded, but we are on the right side of history and we are greater in number. And
well, you know what I always say, nobody outworks us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Liz.
Well,
all right, Fanal is coming up.
Yeah,
and
Karen,
she's unmuting.
Yeah, I'm unmuting. I love that conversation, and I particularly love the piece around thinking about how Moms for Liberty names themselves. And if you just sort of think about the average person who's listening, if you say parental rights, they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm all about that, because they're not digging underneath. And that's where the work becomes so important about what they do. And I'll just hark right back to making injustice public to the public, making injustice public to everyone. And we have to think about what that means and what that looks like to people in our community. How do we get this information out there? Because that's really what it's all about, to get people involved and understanding what's actually happening. So thank you. That was awesome. So now I get to talk to I get to talk to Ms. Binkley about the work that she's doing. So Cheryl, I'm so excited. The first meeting that I went to with you, it was around this whole Moms for Liberty. It was around all the funding, and you took us through all the steps of how we can identify and understand what these programs are. So let's talk a little bit today about the work that you are doing. And as the, let me find my place here, as the co-founder for forpubliceducation.org. So let's talk a little bit about the candidates, about what you want to provide for them, and the work that you're currently doing, and after hearing all of this conversation.
Hello, everybody. It is delightful to be with the badass women from Network Nova. I always enjoy being both in the audience and then using what I learned here. My name is Cheryl Binkley, and I am part of For Public Education. We're a group that came together back 2.5 years ago when our school board was under attack and had people coming and screaming epithets at our school board members and doing all sorts of hideous things. Including sending them messages like, I know where you live and I know where your children should go to school. You should die a terrible death. And so those kinds of things were happening to our local school board members who had, volunteered to run for and do the work of keeping our schools high quality for our kids in our neighborhoods. And so we've been pretty successful in that 2.5 years. We've had a full election of the Fairfax School Board and several other. Last year was a big election all across the state of all but about 7 of our school boards in the state. We have one of the things about helping school board candidates and school board members is that every district is different. And there are 132 districts in Virginia. And they range all the way from Fairfax County that has 200 schools to Highland County that has 2 schools. And they range from districts that have 12 school board members to districts that have 3 school board members. It's a very, very varied scenario. So each is different.
So let me ask you, so you've got these candidates. How are we preparing them? And so that's really part of what you do, is to help them be successful. So what are a couple of the strategies that you use to help school board candidates get elected?
One of the first things is to help them be aware of the time. One is just recruiting candidates, finding people who are still willing to do this, to face the gauntlet, so to speak, but also are dedicated to the kids, to our children and our communities and neighborhoods. The second then is helping them to understand the political landscape and I don't mean that in terms of the culture wars only. I mean that in terms of the timelines that candidates have to fulfill. Getting signatures, filing papers, getting a message ready, things like websites, things that used to never really be important to a school board candidate because it was local. And it is based on very tight numbers that your election can be based on well under 1,000 votes. Mm-hmm. And so helping them understand the timeline is one of the things that I would encourage every activist group in a locality to do. We've reached out to all around the state, various local groups that are doing work in their district, because in 132 districts, one group can't do it all. So we are networking with all the various districts and what's going on in terms of the landscape in theirs. For instance, Spotsylvania had terrible takeovers, as bad a time as Loudoun and Virginia Beach and Fairfax, but they recovered. They got their school board back. And that's been happening in a lot of ours. In Fairfax this year and in Loudoun, a lot of positive candidates winning the seats. So a timeline, understanding the money. Most school board candidates fund at least 50% of their own campaign, which used to not be a big deal until you had Independent Women's Forum and those folks pouring money into school board elections, which meant our local candidates who were not supposed to be partisan were having to raise money to meet what were incredible amounts of private money often from outside the state.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that candidates can do, and we're still in the process of preparing that. This year is not a big year for school board elections because Virginia divides them, and most of the counties were elected last year. This year, only cities and towns. So there are about 5 cities that are electing school board members this year, and two small towns.
Well, I think that's probably good so that it cuts down on the work for you guys and your preparation. And also the really good news is that after the summit, you'll be participating in programming too, so that it will further help candidates. Because I know right here in Virginia Beach, there's 4. So you're still going to have your hands.
Virginia Beach is one of the cities that is electing this year, as is Richmond, as is our towns like, I have the list here, but where did I put it? Chesapeake, Norfolk, Richmond, Virginia Beach, and then 2 small towns. So those places, not only do we need to help the school board candidates, but it's very important that the other candidates for things like Board of Supervisors, mayor, and state legislature stuff, even our national elections that are this year, that they understand the education issues. Because when all this started, it was remarkable how many officials had bought into this idea of the failing school system and thought they had to do something.
Yeah.
And
it's that messaging. Yeah. It's that messaging.
Just the amount of lobbying money that was being spent on pushing that among our legislators and our officials was staggering. And our parents were buying into it somewhat.
Yeah, it's obvious. It's definitely obvious down here. And then watching Youngkin, who had the nerve to campaign in front of school buildings and then not allow us to fund them, that really is so hypocritical. And they're just pushing that narrative that, we know the reality rarely lines up with the Republican narrative. That's just facts. So I'm in Norfolk where we've got school board candidates running as well. So I've really learned a lot from you being here. So that was awesome, Cheryl.
Yeah, so Cheryl,
thank you so much.
We'll look forward to the after programming from the summit. So guys, we were talking to Cheryl Binkley, the co-founder of forpubliceducation.org. So thank you, Cheryl. So Carrie, why don't we just get to, today's show? What did you think?
Well, I mean, this is stuff that we've been carrying on our hearts. It's so nice to know there are people out there like Jennifer and Liz and Cheryl who are doing something about it and helping us equip ourselves. I'm always talking about how Network Nova just equips grassroots volunteers and grassroots leaders. And I think that they are providing resources to equip us as well. So that's such a great part of Network Nova is to come here and get our resources. I also loved what Jennifer said about knitting together a coalition, because we do that. I mean, I think all of our grassroots groups are working very hard to do that, trying to find other leaders. One thing, when the book banning conversation began in Virginia Beach, the Jewish community in Virginia Beach was instrumental in helping to fend it off the first time. Because as their history shows, that banning books is one way to chip away at the history of the Holocaust. And so you will find allies in a lot of different places, but you got to work it. And I know the people on this call have the energy to do it. I'm inspired.
I am too. And I think because we have all of the after programming from the summit, the post programming. So, but remember that there's also going to be the candidate room at the summit, which people will have an opportunity to have some real one-on-one opportunities to really dig into the issues that are most important. And it doesn't matter whether you consider yourself a seasoned candidate or whether you are a novice. At the end of the day, things are always changing. The way that we have conversations, the way that we understand the education wars, the way that we understand how to fight Moms for Liberty, you have to come and be able to get up to speed on all this stuff. So
absolutely. And right, sorry to interrupt, but I'm thinking of all the people who may be thinking about running for school board. They need to be in there. So because it is kind of an off year, and we've only got 7 municipalities who are doing their school board elections. I'm hoping to recruit some school board candidates from coastal Virginia to go up to the Women's Summit so they can connect with everyone. But I'm sure there are a lot of people on this call who are or know someone who's considering running for school board. We got to outnumber the crazies.
Yeah, we
That's
do.
one way to do it. That's one way to do it.
That's
Just
one way
run.
to do it. We have a really great video that we want to close the show with, and we're right at the top of the hour. But I do want to make sure that everybody knows that there's an audio version of the Friday Power Lunch. It's available on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. So you can listen to us or you can watch us. Either one, we'll take it. But what we'll do is next week, we're going to have a fantastic show. It's Kylie Spencer, and she is the one for Raising Right. So you want to get to that. And then we're also going to have Sarah Standiford, who is the National Campaign Director for Planned Parenthood Action Fund. So a great show for next week, Carrie, but also because it's Father's Day this weekend, we have a fantastic video to watch as we go out.
What's this? Dear Dad.
Dear Dad.
Dear Dad.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you for helping me grow into a person who believes anything is possible.
Thank you for teaching me to advocate for myself, even when I am scared.
Which is actually why I wrote this letter.
It's not easy to say this, but I need your help.
You taught me to fight for freedom, but now the government is trying to take away my rights.
Even trying to ban IVF, which I might end up needing if you want grandkids. And I know how often you bring up grandkids.
And when I do start a family, I'm worried I won't be able to afford a good home because we keep electing the same old politicians.
I'm not asking you to become a Democrat or even tell your golf buddies about this.
I am just asking you, daughter to dad,
to consider a different type of senator this year.
One who will fight for me as much as you would.
Dad, I love you more than you know.
You've been an incredible father.
I got you, baby.
You've helped me every step of the way. Now I need your help again.
And I know I can count on you.
That was Caroline Gleich, who was on our show last week, and that is fantastic. So why
powerful, very powerful.
It really was. So why don't we, with that, roll the credits?